Okay, thank you so much. Aside of the presentation, we received some question for sometimes in general, sometimes related to individual speakers. So maybe I can try to provide them for the relevant speakers and see if we are able to provide a reply. There is a first question for TSOs. I don't know if Thomas is online and can provide a reply. The question is, do you use the CGMES and related data set, like the outage list, for your activities? And how do you check network system security for the energy trading activities? I don't know if the question is clear for you.
Hi, yes. Not so much, I tend to say. I cannot, unfortunately, also not read the questions, but can you perhaps repeat them? Just
yes, if you use CGM and the related data set, like outage list for your activities, this is one question. And the second, how do you check network system security for the energy trading activities?
I can try to state, but I will not go too much into details, as that's something which is, I would say, I'm not the biggest expert in, but as far as I know, indeed, these CGM aspects and outage plannings are indeed used, and I think are handled also in the pre-coupling systems, where TSOs do to calculate the capacity domains, which are based on common grid models, and where indeed also outage plannings are taken into account to deliver the capacities towards then the market coupling algorithm, based on which then the allocation indeed is done. And from what I know in regards to the security analysis, indeed, this is something which is then done afterwards, after the market coupling, when all the results are coming back, and when indeed all the nominations and schedulings are checked, and where indeed in the post-coupling phase security analysis are performed indeed by TSOs based on the market results. So I think that to some extent answers, I hope, the question. That's at least also what I can say from the experience I have, but if there are really need for further details, I think it's something where we should try to come back on, but I think that's at least already giving a high-level answer as well.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I see there is a second question for NEMOs. The question once more is twofold, two related questions, I would say. First, what's the link between the short and medium term NEMO activities and the more long-term planning analysis as developed, for example, in the ENTSOe SDAC? And then the second related question, is there any connection between NEMO's activities and, for example, the 10-year network development plan produced by ENTSOe? I don't know if any of the other panelists have any comment on this, but I would say that what Alvaro just concluded in his presentation, describing the roadmap with the list of requests for changes and prospective R&D plan with the list of activities to be deployed in the next 3 years to come in order to improve performance and support the implementation of those requests for change by nature is in that direction. So it is a way to plan ahead with a longer term perspective what is going to be needed by the market, and to trigger timely the preparatory activities with a
Cosimo, are you still in the call?
There was also, when there are already prototypes available, the estimated benefit in terms of performance expected from that kind of R&D improvement. Obviously, the 10-year network development plan is of another order of magnitude in terms of duration in the time. So that's going beyond our scope. Market has, by definition, I would say, a more limited scope. We have to cope with the next 2, 3, 4 years in order to ensure the stable and reliable operation of the market coupling. And I would add one last comment on this, which is already been somewhat mentioned by Alvaro. Our role is to, in the coupling project, is to estimate if what is expected to go live in the next years is supported, is a chance to be supported or not by the algorithm. But when we come to completely new requirement, which requires delivering new prototypes of the algorithm, sometimes even the requirement is still missing. A typical example could be that we know that we have to implement flow-based, but until we have a network model, a specific network model for flow-based, we cannot run simulation. So this is by definition constraining our perspective view to the next years, because we won't have any kind of this technical information for 5 years to come. We are lucky if we have the next 1, 2, 3 years perspective data for the network topology, for the product requirement, and so on. I don't know if the panelists has any further comment on this point.
Yes, just to comment that the roadmap is an exercise that both NEMOs and TSOs are done every year, but it can be updated several times through the year. It's very important to have the roadmap in order to properly assess not only the scalability, but also plan the R&D actions. Note that for those R&D actions and for assessing the long-term scalability, for the long-term scalability is not sometimes we are not able to properly test because either we have some lack of data and then we do some assumptions in order to model as the best we can the future situation, or sometimes we don't have such a requirement implemented in the algorithm. If this is the case, then the prototypes we develop in R&D program are quite useful in order to properly assess the future performance of the algorithm. Note that both R&D and scalability are based on assumptions, and those assumptions are done when we don't have functionality or updated data. Another thing I would like to comment regarding the scalability is that for this year 2019 we have assessed the 2020 scenario and the 2022 scenarios. But in next year, the interpretation of the year +1 and year +2 from the algorithm methodology will change. And that means that for the 2020 annual report, we will be assessing in the scalability study the year 2022 and 2024, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, I see a further question, always having focus on network topology, I would say. The question once more is twofold. We like double questions. First point is, if we envisage any decrease in the number of PTDFs for the Austrian border, bidding zone border, I think this is related to the effect we show that with a huge increase of the number of PTDFs after the split, there's been also a temporary impact on performance. So if we envisage any decrease in this number of PTDFs, this is the first question. And a second, somewhat similar related question is a bit more tricky. If we compare in the scalability report the scenario 1 and the scenario 2, we see that scenario 2 appears better performing than scenario 1, even if in principle it should be more complicated. And the difference seems being that scenario 2 is not including, for the reason you Alvaro mentioned before, the modeling of the Allegro cable, which is available in scenario 1, because in scenario 2 we introduce also the modeling of the core, which is not yet providing information for the Allegro. So is this Allegro cable the potential reason to justify, even in a more complex scenario, a better performance because we are ignoring this requirement. These are the two heavily technical questions, but this is what we're dealing about. So maybe Alvaro, you have any comment? First of all, if we envisage any decrease in the number of PTDFs, or the general or you to us, obviously.
Yes, I can again I can try to answer at least some parts of the questions. So indeed, on the German-Austrian split, I think over there was seen an increased number of PTDFs given as constraints towards the algorithm. I think in general, of course, decreasing the number of PTDFs is something which are areas where TSOs are and will be investigating. But of course, to some extent, network topology as such is something which is also not so easy to reduce. One cannot really cut lines. However, I think, but then this goes a bit more into the mathematical way of handling and calculating the capacity domain. I think over there, TSOs indeed are looking into ways of how to, let's say, from a mathematical perspective, reduce the number of PTDFs, which do not change, let's say, the constraints that are given to the algorithm. So on that sense, it is something where TSOs are indeed looking into, and where there is some kind of awareness. So that's then really not really just, let's say, by removing lines, but more handling and improving the process from a mathematical perspective. So in that sense, it's not purely for the DAT border, but in general for flow-based capacity calculations where this is handled. I think currently then mainly on the CWE side, as over there, this is something where the main number of PTDF constraints are created, and I think these experiences will also be transferred towards core. So that's perhaps already a partial answer for the first question. And then for the second one, with regards to the two differences in the performance of scenario 1 and scenario 2, I think indeed, as elaborated already by Alvaro, in the first scenario, we clearly look into the changes of what will go live in 2020, where indeed, as mentioned, the Allegro cable is included. And the reason why there is a difference between both data sets, let's say, is because, of course, the Allegro cable will first go live in the CWE area, which is an area which is operational and where already capacity calculations are done. Whereas when looking into a 2-year batch, we're looking towards the implementation of the core flow-based market coupling, which is still a project in development and where, of course, all the topologies, including the Allegro, are still steps to be done on really providing capacity domains. And I think that's something where, let's say, we are looking a bit at timing. That's when the moment that these performance assessments were done, and I think then we're not discussing June, but already earlier this year, these full data sets of core were not available yet, which is of course something where TSOs are continuously working on and improving towards the project, and step by step indeed making sure that during the internal preparations, these data sets become complete and become in the end also representative, so that they can be also then furthermore handed over towards, let's say, the joint project for performing assessments and checking indeed what it will mean in terms of impact. I think it's, however, worth to mention that one could say, okay, we reduce the time to first solution from scenario 1 to scenario 2, despite, let's say, the complexity would increase. But that's perhaps a personal feeling, but I think it's based on the discussion I have seen passing by, is that one could say that also with the Allegro cable included and other constraints as well, which are perhaps not yet included, that the scalability or the time for finding a solution would be would increase, or would at least be similar as a scenario 1. And the main reason why this is cost is again due to mathematical constraints, also mainly due to PTDF constraints which are increased. And I think on this one, I already stated that also on TSO side we're looking into improvements, but also in the joint project. And I think that's certainly worth to mention in the new release that will come being the euphemia 10.5, we definitely foresaw some improvements which were related to the extended LTA inclusion that, let's say, almost fully will mitigate these problems. The time to first solution reported over there, and I think it was clearly mentioned, was a reduction of almost 50%. And these are, let's say, some ways how we looked into the future on what the challenges would be with regard to these flow-based constraints, which one will create possible additional complexity, and how we can mitigate it. I think that's clearly already a good outcome of the R&D phase that we had, where this euphemia 10.5 release will make us much more scalable towards the future and towards these challenges that will come. So I think it's then the answer is a bit twofold. I think indeed the scenario is showing a bit better results, which is, let's say, mainly related to the timing that simulations were done where some full data sets were not there yet. But to some extent, one could say that it's to a certain amount also representative, since we do foresee also in the future improvements, which were not there yet at the moment that we did the scalability on NEMO side, but they will be introduced as well.
Thank you, Thomas. Just to add a further minor comment, as it has been said somewhat, you see that in the R&D, we are indeed focusing the problems which are attracting more attention and finding the solution, searching the solution exactly for those problems. So network topology, the pure performance, and so on. In general, as for the issues we have to manage, there are three dimensions. One is what we have to manage. On this, we are simply receiving the request to implement changes, and we have to try to comply. So we have little leverage on this. We can leverage on the how we do it. So the typical example suggests different modelings of some requirement could be the way forward to make it supported, a requirement which otherwise would be proving more demanding in terms of performance. Otherwise, there is the when. Maybe the needed R&D is taking longer than expected. So requirement which is requested now, it could be not supported now, but be supported after some further time. So this is a fundamental part of the process. The market coupling has to deliver what is being requested, and it can try to modify the how and the when, having very little leverage on what has to be done. I don't know if there are any further question which is being received in the last minutes. Maybe Kata, Rodrigo from the background, are you seeing further last minute questions? Because we are slightly ahead with the schedule, so maybe if there is some relevant question, we can take the time to reply. Otherwise, we can move to the next section. No? So if there are no further relevant question, thank you so much, Alvaro, for your in-depth and extensive presentation. We move now to the SIDC chapter review, and I invite Vladimir and David to present the outcomes of this analysis in the report.
Oh, good morning.
Ludivine may hand over the control to... Okay, thank you.